If you think you know what a perfect family looks like, think again. Before we dive into the chilling truth hidden behind white picket fences and smiling family photos, make sure you subscribe, like, and drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this story will haunt you long after it ends. It was a bright August morning in Frederick, Colorado, a quiet suburban town where crimes rarely made headlines. Rows of identical homes stretched across trimmed lawns, each with neat driveways and waving neighbors. But on the morning of August 13th, 2018, something about the Watts residence fell off. The front door was locked. The car was still in the driveway. And inside the house, silence lingered like a scream that had already been swallowed. At 8:30 a.m., Shanann Watts' friend, Nicole Atkinson, arrived after failing to reach her for hours. Shanann, 34, pregnant, and devoted to her two young daughters, Bella and Celeste, was never the kind of woman to go off-grid. She was reliable, organized, the kind who planned her life down to the minute. When no one answered the door, Nicole's instinct screamed something was wrong. Within minutes, she was on the phone with police. Officers arrived, knocking firmly, calling out Shanann's name. Chris Watts, Shanann's husband, pulled up moments later. Calm, almost too calm. He explained that Shanann must have taken the kid somewhere, maybe a play date, maybe her mother's. But her purse, phone, and medication were still in the house. Even her wedding ring sat silently on the nightstand. Something wasn't adding up. Detectives began to sense it immediately. Chris, the quiet, hard-working husband, was strangely emotionless. He cooperated, answered questions, and offered theories. Yet his words were hollow, like someone reading from a script he didn't believe. The house was immaculate, too immaculate. No sign of a struggle, no signs of forced entry. Only the suffocating sense that something very dark had taken place behind those walls. By nightfall, the story of the missing Watts family was already spreading across Colorado. Search teams combed the area. Neighbors handed out flyers. Drones hovered over nearby fields. On social media, Chris made emotional pleas for his family's return. "If you're out there, just come home," he said, his voice flat but measured. Some viewers saw a desperate husband. Others saw a man acting his part a little too perfectly. Investigators weren't convinced. They pulled security footage from the neighbor's house, a clip showing Chris backing his truck into the garage early that morning. The footage was grainy, but something about it was unsettling. The neighbor, watching from behind the officer, muttered, "He's not acting right. He never parks like that." Detectives began quietly building their profile. Financial strain, marital tension, texts that hinted Shanann was worried Chris was distant, detached. Something was shifting in their once picture-perfect marriage. As night turned to morning, the case of the missing Watts family was no longer a search. It was a race against time. Where were Shanann, Bella, and Celeste? And more importantly, what was Chris Watts hiding? Because just as police prepared to issue a statewide alert, they uncovered something chilling. A clue buried deep in Chris's own words. Something he never meant for anyone to hear. But when detectives replayed the neighbor's security footage frame by frame, what they saw in that truck changed everything. The following morning, investigators returned to the Watts home, this time with a warrant and a sharper focus. Chris stood on the front lawn, arms folded, eyes hollow. The media had already swarmed the street. Neighbors whispered. Reporters rolled cameras, and the once quiet suburban block had become the center of a national mystery. Detective Tammy Lee from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation noticed the first real crack in Chris's story during a routine interview. His timeline was inconsistent. Small details kept shifting. What time Shanann got home, when he last saw the girls, what route he took to work. Each correction seemed rehearsed, as though he was piecing together a story he'd already told himself one too many times. Then came the polygraph. Chris agreed to take it, confident, almost smug. "I didn't hurt my family," he said. But as the test began, every answer betrayed him. His pulse raced. His breath shortened. The machine didn't lie. When the examiner leaned in and said softly, "Chris, we know you're not telling the truth," he didn't deny it. He simply stared down, silent, as if his carefully built world was beginning to crumble. Meanwhile, forensic teams combed through Shanann's phone. The The messages painted a painful portrait, a marriage unraveling. Shanann had confided in friends about Chris's coldness, his growing distance, the feeling that something inside him had changed. "He's not the man I married." One of her texts read, "I think there's someone else." That suspicion soon became fact. Investigators discovered Chris had been having an affair with co-worker, a woman named Nicole Kessinger. She believed Chris was already separated, a man in the middle of divorce, not the father of 2 little girls and an unborn son. Their relationship was passionate, secret, and reckless. And as detectives dug deeper, the motive began to take shape like blood seeping through a white sheet. Detectives confronted Chris with the affair. His composure slipped. His breathing grew heavy. In that moment, the devoted father facade fell away, and something colder emerged. "Just tell us where they are," Detective Lee said quietly. "Let them rest." Hours later, Chris asked to speak with his father. In the small gray interview room, his father's trembling voice broke the silence. "Son, what happened?" Chris's voice cracked. He mumbled something no one expected. "It was Shanann," he said. "She hurt the girls, and then I lost it." It was a desperate lie, a final, cruel attempt to shift blame onto the woman he had vowed to love and protect. But detectives knew the truth. Evidence didn't lie. They brought him back to the footage, the neighbor security video. Frame by frame, they revealed it. Chris loading his truck at 5:27 a.m., carrying what looked like 3 distinct shapes wrapped in blankets. That wasn't a man going to work. That was a man disposing of his family. Detectives followed him to the Anadarko oil field, the same site where Chris worked, a remote, desolate patch of land surrounded by rust-colored tanks and endless plains. Chris finally broke. His voice was barely a whisper. "They're there," he said. He led officers to 2 crude oil tanks, and just beyond them, a shallow grave. Inside it, they found Shanann, face down in the earth she once thought would be her new beginning. The oil tanks held something far worse. Each tank concealed one of his daughters. The officer stood frozen, wind sweeping across the empty field. This was no longer a missing persons case. It was one of the most haunting family murders in American history. And yet, even as the truth surfaced, no one could answer why. What could make a man murder everything he ever claimed to love? Because what investigators discovered next, messages, deleted searches, secret plans, will reveal that Chris Watts had been preparing for this far longer than anyone imagined. The morning after Chris Watts confessed, the small town of Frederick woke up to something it could never unsee. The man they once waved to across their lawns, the father who played with his daughters in the driveway, was now the monster behind a crime that defied comprehension. The question wasn't if he did it anymore. It was why. Detectives combed through his phone, his emails, his search history, and what they found was chilling in its cold precision. Weeks before the murders, Chris had been researching life insurance policies, searching how to start a new life, and texting his mistress about a fresh beginning. While Shanann was away on a business trip, he'd taken Nicole to dinner, confessed he was free, and promised a future together. Behind that promise lay a quiet plan to erase everything that tied him to his old life, his wife, his daughters, even his unborn son. In the courtroom, prosecutors described it as the ultimate betrayal. A man willing to destroy his family to live out a fantasy. The evidence was undeniable. Cell data, text messages, security footage, and, most damning of all, his own confession. When asked why, Chris spoke softly, almost emotionless. "I thought if I got rid of them, I could have a new life." The room fell silent. There was no rage in his tone, no remorse, only the terrifying calm of someone who had finally unburdened himself. Not of guilt, but of secrets. Shanann's parents wept openly. Her father, voice shaking, told the court, "You took everything from us. Every smile, every laugh, every heartbeat in our family." The judge's words cut like glass. This was the most inhumane, cold-blooded act I've seen in my entire career. Chris Watts was sentenced to 5 life terms without the possibility of parole. The man who once looked like the embodiment of suburban success would now spend the rest of his life in a cell. His only companions the ghosts of those he destroyed. But even behind bars, the story didn't end. Letters began arriving, hundreds of them, from people fascinated, horrified, and obsessed. Some expressed sympathy, others disgust. Chris responded to some, revealing disturbing glimpses into his thoughts. "I still see them," he wrote, "every night." Outside, the Watts family home was eventually sold. The neighbors moved away. The town of Frederick went quiet again, but the silence was heavier now, haunted by the memory of a family that once seemed perfect. And yet, perhaps the most haunting truth of all wasn't what Chris did, but how easily he hid it, how normal he looked, how many people smiled at him, never realizing they were looking straight into the face of evil. Because sometimes the most dangerous monsters don't come from dark alleys or prison cells. They come from behind the smiles we trust the most. If this story shook you, remember, behind every closed door, there's a story no one sees coming. Subscribe now, because the next story might be closer than you think.